People who have been watching this channel for a while have probably noticed that it's been a bit since I covered a more romance-focused visual novel. That's certainly not out of dislike for games with soap opera-esque love stories. I am, after all, a undeniably very straight-leaning woman. It's just that there aren't many people highlighting other parts of the genre, so I feel inclined to share my love for those. For me, it takes a particularly exceptional title of the lovey-dovey variety for it to be worth spending a whole month making a video on. So it's probably obvious by the fact I'm talking about one of these games today that it's one of those said particularly exceptional ones. It's something that captured my heart so strongly that I decided I wanted to devote a whole video to it only a short time into my first playthrough. It's something that made me laugh and cry, and it's something that left such a strong impact on me that all I could do after finishing it was lay down and have a long, hard think about myself. Parfait, Chocolat Second Brew is one of a handful of games in the maid cafe genre, alongside titles like Pia Carrot and Nicopata. This one starring a college student who again pursues his dream of running a cafe after his departed older brother was burned down half a year ago, leading him to connect with people familiar and new, lovers and friends. It's a simple but very cute premise given an immense amount of depth, which should be no surprise to some viewers once you know who worked on it. Developed by former genre titan Giga, most known in English spheres for the Baldur series and Duel Savior, it was released in mid-2005 to strong sales and served as the release that really put scenario writer Maruto Fumiaki on the map. Mostly known then only for his work on the game's prequels, Ripple and Chocolat, he's since become a beloved author for writing the light novel turned anime SaeKano, the 2007 visual novel Damekoi, and of course, White Album 2, a game that regularly tops best VNs of all time lists in both English and Japanese communities. While I haven't checked out any of his other works, I can at least say from having read all of Parfait that it's not hard for me to tell why he's garnered such acclaim. It is, put simply, a beautiful game full of love. It's a game about the joys of connecting with other people, a game about finding a place you belong with the people you belong with. It's a game that takes pride in the smallest parts of life, a game about the kindness the world has to offer. It's a game about building something important with those who matter the most to you, and a game about rebuilding what you've lost. And it does all of these things without ever sugarcoating the very real emotions that come from being with other people, offering some painfully earnest and real portrayals of complex feelings and troubles. Jealousy over siblings, running away from your sorrows, hiding yourself for fear of hurting or being hurt, and wondering how and if we'll ever find happiness. I certainly have issues with parts of the game. A few sections of it suffer from common genre issues like middling side routes, as well as deeply frustrating tropes of the era it came out in, but no problem I have with it can overtake the utterly incredible storytelling highs that comes from the game's greatest moments, and the generally beautiful writing it offers the whole rest of the time. In my mind, Parfait evens out to be one of the best visual novels of the 2000s, and like many titles I cover on this channel, I am beyond excited to share it with everyone. So without further ado, let's dive into Maruto Fumiaki's breakout title and explore just what makes it so wonderful, with a slight detour to clarify something first. Parfait, like many VNs, has something I am now terming re-release soup, where a game gets released so many times with so many changes that it's hard to even tell what version to play. The one most people recommend is Second Brew Reorder, which is more or less the original game with a fantastic new arranged soundtrack, some post-game side stories, and a less cool box. I personally own the original release too, just because it looks nice on a shelf and this game means a lot to me, but for all intents and purposes, that DVD case budget release is the one you'll want to get. There's also Second Style on the PS2, backported to PC as Standard Edition and later ported to Vita, which I'll get into bit by bit as the review goes on. It is interesting, even if not something I can recommend to prospective players. And finally, there's a remake which drops the arranged music and side stories in favor of fully redone artwork, which is not to my taste, but this version is getting translated by Sakai Project, so look forward to that in the whatever time it takes to get done. But for this video, we're going to be focusing on Reorder, and it's what I'd advise anyone interested in the game to play or snag if they want a legit Japanese copy. The only downside to it is that it's not available digitally, which is kind of a bummer, but these days it's not so hard to get a hold of the physical release thanks to proxy services like today's sponsor, Bye! I cover a lot of things on this channel that aren't possible to acquire for domestic auction and shopping websites like eBay and Amazon US, and I regularly get asked, how the heck is one supposed to get a hold of any of this stuff I talk about? That is where Bye comes in, as their service allows you to shop for anything and everything from sites like Yahoo Auctions, Amazon Japan, and Mercury. You pick and pay for an item, Bye buys it on your behalf, it arrives at their warehouse, and then they ship it to you along with anything else you decide to order, like clothes or accessories or posters or even more video games. Whatever you can find on a supported website is fair game, and you can even request purchases from stores they don't have simple built-in support for, like boutiques and artist sites, so you can support your favorite illustrators with merch. It's super easy to use, available in tons of languages, supports many payment methods, and will ship just about anywhere in the world. On top of all of that, Bye is giving everyone anyone watching this 10% off their first purchase using the link in the description. So if there's ever been something you wanted to get from Japan that's been out of reach, then save a couple bucks while you're at it and enjoy a box of cool stuff with the help of Bai. Thanks again to them for sponsoring this video and providing that cool 10% discount code to all my viewers. With all that clarified, I think we can finally start diving into the game proper. Parfait is set in then contemporary Japan and follows the life of one Takamura Hitoshi, an average 20-year-old college student who lives a normal life, until he one day gets a phone call that changes everything. A new shopping center by the name of Brick Mall is opening up in town, and the owner wants Hitoshi to bring back the restaurant him and his older brother Kazuto built back to life there, the Café Famille, which tragically burned down half a year ago. While the two people closest to him, his professional patissier older sister Emma and former Famille maid ex-girlfriend Rikako, are both doubtful about the business venture working out for a whole variety of reasons, both emotional and practical, Hitoshi pushes on anyways and gathers a whole crew together. There's Kasuri, a Japanese-styled sweets expert from his devious and playful personality, who makes a daring getaway of Hitoshi from her family to join the crew. Asuka, a kind and honest girl that Hitoshi acts as a private tutor for, excited to once again don a maid uniform like she did at the old Famille. And Yui, a weird peppy girl who sneaks into the cafe the night before opening to apply for the job, singing her heart out and subsequently winning over Hitoshi. Riding on nothing but hope and a desire to carry on the dream of his departed brother, Hitoshi opens Famille to the public again and finds it to be a lot more than he bargained for. Not just in getting everyone to work together and run a smooth business, but in the form of a competing cafe unexpectedly opening across the courtyard from his. Curio Number 3, the latest in a restaurant family that inspired the creation of Famille to begin with, headed by the young, brash, and competitive Rhea and the chill old man Itabashi. The next few crucial months after opening will determine the fate of Hitoshi's business and the shared dream of the Famille crew. From October to December, him, the friends of the cafe, and those around them will face wonderful times and painful times, joyous moments and hardships, and maybe even find love. People, new and old, all struggling in their own ways to make it through life, united as friends and family by one little cafe in a fledgling mall, fighting for one simple mission: to take down Curio. Parfait is, in the purest sense of the term, a character-driven game. Unlike a lot of titles I cover on this channel, there's no grand world-building or magic or low-key sci-fi elements or any of that stuff. It's just some dudes and some gals and some cafes in a mall in contemporary mid-2000s Japan, complete with flip phones and cute retro ringtones. This isn't to say there's nothing going on with the characters, however, as the cafe business part of the game that serves as a backbone to everything that happens is super well fleshed out. Famille is a cozy, comfy, European-feeling restaurant in a bustling European-styled mall, with tons always happening behind the scenes, often echoing the absolute chaos of the small business service industry. You got fussy customers, goofs and gaffs in the kitchen, and close-knit employees all trying to take care of each other both for business reasons and as friends. It doesn't shy away from the fact that the food industry is challenging to work in, but it also shows these kinds of small cafes and bakeries as being places where close bonds and companionship can form and be strengthened as well as tested. It's not shy about indulging in the creative side of the business either. It's clear Maruto did at least some level of research into the world of confectionaries, as there's a truly staggering number of sweets, both famous and obscure, represented, with regular details given into the process by Kasuri and eventually Emma when she rejoins the crew. It never feels overwhelming as someone unfamiliar though. On the contrary, the game made me interested in making sweets when I first played a bit of it months back, and I absolutely adore this now as someone who's recently got into baking as a hobby. Still though, I'm just a hobbyist who can't have ever claimed to work in the service industry. I'm certain this game smooths over a lot of the imperfections, to put it lightly, but I found its portrayal to be at least sympathetic and at most pretty engrossing with how the game goes into the business end of things, as well as the ways in which such a job can be taxing. Juggling finances, making tough managerial decisions, dealing with busy days, overly personal customers, and sacrificing free time all for the sake of creating something that can bring a smile to the faces of your community. That's all given at least some lip service here and helps to make the setting feel more real than just a backdrop for character building. And I mean, it is also really clever for that purpose. It's a space where everyone has to work together in close proximity, so everyone's bound to get to know each other beyond the level needed for the main character and any given girl to have a relationship. The result is a cast that feels like it grows naturally at an even pace, a whole bunch of people interacting in a mutual space that tests them in a number of ways and expose every facet of their personality, both good and bad. The said cast is incredibly lovable and diverse in terms of personalities, starting with the lead himself, Hitoshi. He's a kind, hard-working, and sometimes wisecracking guy, a lovable if emotionally blind at times person who wants the best for those around him and cares about family above all, almost to a severe detriment as is explored later. He is, in pretty much every way, just an average dude, but in a way that I personally found very lovable. He's not some well-put-together pretty bishonen boy or someone that can do everything, he's just a man with a dream who has failures and successes on the way to making that come true, many affecting the people around him deeply. I also appreciate that the game gives him a surprising amount of depth. A lot of time is spent exploring his feelings, like his past of losing his parents and being taken in by Emma's, and he's overall given the same level of emotional complexity as all the romanceable women, which is, to say, a whole hell of a lot, and certainly far more than I'm used to seeing from male leads in romance stories ostensibly marketed towards men. Hitoshi is just so well developed and real as a character that I found myself falling in love with him almost as much as the heroines did by the end, owing primarily to Maruto's incredible sense for prose and monologue. The game almost exclusively follows his perspective of events, with the portrayal of his inner thoughts feeling really warm and human. Paragraphs are often built with contrasting sentences that start the same but end differently, giving a sense of rhythm and pep. Simple actions such as serving a dish or holding a hand are described with a detail that highlights subtle intricacies. It uses creative and fun metaphors in ways that feel seamless but spontaneous and entertaining, and the list goes on and on. Maruto's style of prose in this game, and the way I tend to sell friends on it, is that it's full of love for life. There's an often joyous quality, like it simply existing is a wonderful thing. I played a lot of this game while stressed out from moving one apartment to another, and every time I left a play session, I felt reinvigorated and happy about even the small things in life. You know, besides the whole moving thing. Just as it's capable of showing love and joy like that though, so too is it capable of aptly exploring the more challenging parts of the human psyche. Hitoshi often gets lost in thought, trying to process complicated emotions and even some traumas. He reflects on how he's treated others, and he spends nights trying to process all that's happened in a long day, none of it downplaying his feelings nor the feelings of others. The result of this is pretty much every emotionally poignant moment landing, often with powerful and memorable quotes that stick with you long after playing. Like, there's a certain line from the end of Reia's story that means something like, "The world around you is a bit kinder than you thought." It's not all that wild of an idea, just a nice uplifting message, but it's written so poetically and simply with a warmth and heart that feels profound while still being casual. There's no attempt to be unduly grandiose or deep with such a simple concept, but rather to present it as a kind, natural thought. Maruto's just got that linguistic flair for making simple ideas feel beautiful and momentous in his native language, and it makes me excited to see how it'll be rendered into English. While the game isn't always this breezily profound and resonant, it does constantly keep up this level of love, warmth, and wonder, which does a whole hell of a lot to make Hitoshi such an endearing protagonist. He's an endlessly charming person with a heart of gold, though there were certainly a few times I wanted to knock some sense into him with how realistically inept he can be with handling others. Despite all that though, he's not my favorite character in the game. That would be Rikako for reasons I'll get into later, but I honestly love everyone, as is not so surprising for a character-focused title. Everything that happens so the cast can be fleshed out, and I found myself becoming endeared to both the love interests and the more minor players. For the former, there's a total of 6 that Hitoshi can end up with the generally recommended route order being something like as follows. Yui Kazumi is the first character I ended up with when I played this game without using a guide earlier this year, and she still remains one of my personal favorites. She's a bit of an airhead, a bit emotionally dense, and super clumsy, but she's still a deeply lovable and incredibly talented musician who also has a habit of singing orders back to the customers. Her introduction in the game, sneaking into the cafe late at night before it's even opened, stealing a uniform and singing a beautiful song in the mall, is probably one of the most iconic moments of this era in visual novels to me, and a lot of her events are a blast to go through. It all culminates nicely too, with a very heartfelt ending that ties into the themes of the next heroine. Reia Katori is, besides Rikako, probably the most beloved and memorable heroine of the game, and the only romanceable character from the competing Curio Cafe. She's the resident half-French blonde girl, an archetypical tsundere with a strong competitive spirit to take down the rival store. It never feels quite antagonistic though, thanks to her tendency to give advice alongside insults, and the game goes through a lot of lengths to establish her as a genuinely kind and caring person. Once you do start getting to her events though, and eventually her true end, she opens up a lot to Hitoshi and becomes one of the most relatable members of the cast, struggling greatly with her family and trying to find a place that she belongs. Also, again, her route has one of the most iconic lines in the game, as well as a whole host of perfect rom-com writing moments. I feel like you could do a whole essay just on the structure of a couple of those moments, and I'll talk about one of them soon enough. Asuka Yukino acts as the resident Kohai character, being someone close to graduating high school who's studying to enter college with the help of Hitoshi as her private tutor. She's a bit naive, thinks analytically and a bit out of the box sometimes, and generally works her hardest at once again making the guests of FamiU happy. Also, she says sensei really cutely.
のおかげだよ。
Her route is unfortunately one of the less fleshed out in the game, and not something I feel is necessary reading to get the full Parfait experience, but if you enjoy typical gal game routes of the time with some extra fanciful prose courtesy of Maruto, then it's a fun couple of hours. I will say that I really like her normal events though, they're really fun thanks to how her personality plays off the other cafe members like Kasuri. The younger daughter of a long-standing family of traditional Japanese patissiers, Kasuri Suzunami is by far the most mischievous and playful member of the cast. She has no qualms about starting and sharing gossip, playing pranks on everyone around her, and saying dumb things purely to get a reaction and sow chaos amongst the cafe's members. As a character in and of herself, completely devoid of the context of her ending, she's probably tied with Rhea as my second favorite member of the cast. Some of the most memorable normal events comes from one she's involved in, and her ridiculous sense for hijinks, retorts, and dirty jokes is unmatched by just about any other visual novel heroine that comes to my mind. But, well, as I'll get into once it's time to talk about spoilers, she really got the short end of the stick of her romantic plot. Emma Sugisawa is the widow of Hitoshi's older brother and his cousin turned older sister, following the passing of Hitoshi's parents, leading hers to take him in. She is, as you can probably guess from that description, a huge brocon, though outside of her ending it's mostly played up for comedy in part due to her very vivid personality. She's loud, sometimes a bit smug, struggles to get up in the morning, and is super defensive of Hitoshi, but wants nothing more than to take care of those important in her life and make nice sweets for everyone. While I can't say I had much expectation for her route at the beginning of the game, I was pleasantly surprised by the direction Maruto took her character and what it all served as a vehicle to explore, digging deep into some pretty complex feelings that aren't directly related to the whole love with your cousin trope. And then, last but certainly not least, there's Hitoshi's ex-girlfriend, Rikako Natsumi. A brilliant economics major and a pessimistic but not unrealistic thinker, she's one of Famiu's closest allies and a bit of an enigma, often seeming unfazed by everything that happens and keeping a distance from others emotionally. Yui and Rhea might be the girls in the box, or just Yui as of the original release, but Rikako is the true heroine of the game, getting the most development of anyone in the cast, as well as a hell of a lot of foreshadowing throughout the story. The common route and events are loaded with little moments that hint towards something going on with her, but all of it is done so subtly, cleverly, and even played off as moe tropes that there's no way you'd have any idea what's going on with her until the big reveals come swinging around. I also just really love her for being a traditionally girly and feminine character who's also portrayed as really smart. She dresses cute and uses more femme pronouns than the frilly fluffy girls do, but she's an economics major, she's incredibly analytical, adopts a very it-is-what-it-is attitude, and if it weren't for her, then the whole Famiu resurrection would have gone up in smokes by the end of the game. Suffice to say, without getting into spoilers, she is the character I related the most to by the end and the star of the show. Helping to round out the cast are a number of supporting figures. You got Itabashi, an endearing middle-aged man who owns Curio and develops a friendly rivalry with Hitoshi, various family members like Hitoshi's kind adoptive parents and Kasuri's wonderful Ojo-sama older sister, and of course, Reia's co-workers, Hikari, Yoshimi, and Mizuna. The first two are pretty adorable and fun, but it's Mizuna who really steals the show. She doesn't appear super often, but anytime she does is a blast of her incredible comedic timing and snarky personality.
レアと全く同じ反応。
I think where Parfait succeeds in all this, and where a lot of other character-driven games and moege can struggle, is that the world of none of these people revolves around our main character. Despite seeing things mostly from Hitoshi's POV, there are points where we see what happens when he's not around, and the game does a good job at illustrating through those events and general dialogue that the world is a lot larger than just one person. This is both pretty important thematically, and it's just damn good storytelling, another example of how Parfait stays earnest and down to earth. The cast really, truly feels fleshed out and human. While the game does enjoy some exaggeration for the sake of comedy, drama, and romance, everyone ultimately interacts in ways that feels like people would. They display complex emotions that change over time and may not immediately make sense or might just be wrong, and they're not infallible by any means. It's a story that asks its reader to see its characters as just normal people, and it really succeeds at that. A big part of that success is owed to the diversity of situations the cast members find themselves in. Parfait is a rom-com, and it leans heavy in on both the rom and the com in even parts while doing both absurdly well. Like, I would say that if you want to see how to write a story like this perfectly, you would find more than a handful of examples to examine here. One of my favorites comes in super early on the first night of the cafe being open, and during that whole day, Hitoshi is getting acquainted with Rhea, who shows up early in the morning to chew him out for opening a competing business in the same mall. She's brash, smug, demands attention, and by the end of the day, the two get so into their quarrel that they make bets over who will have the best profits, and both make it their goal to take each other down. But then that same night, Hitoshi goes back home to relax and reminisce on the apartment balcony, thinking about what led to Famuyu's first day. And then, unexpectedly, his brand new neighbor in apartment over catches him humming the song Yui had been the prior night, which causes her to jump in surprise and immediately apologize. The two gently talk for a bit about their days, how she just moved in here because of a job at the new mall, funny coincidence that is, and when it eventually cuts to a CG and pans out, it's revealed that it's Rhea, the two separated by a partition so they can't see each other. They eventually exchange partings, each thinking to themselves how kind the person they just met is and wanting to see each other face to face, where they realize who it is they were talking to and start fighting all over again. It's a really funny payoff, building on the already comedic dynamic those two have by contrasting her brattiness with her gentle side, but far more than that, it's really heartwarming and shows Rhea to be a truly kind and lovely person when she's not pitching fights, which sets up some great chemistry with Hitoshi for later. To hone in specifically on the comedy part of the rom-com though, actually this is just me looking for an excuse to talk about the blueberry tart.
Later I'll order cakes to go. Please bring my first order right away.
Wait, please!
Hey, wait!
The setup for this bit is that a British woman, who does not know Japanese at all, comes into the store on vacation and places an incredibly complex order, which then results in the entire staff scrambling to handle her with not a single person there speaking any English because no one has any education that requires it. This continues on for a solid few moments, the customer getting progressively more upset, everyone passing responsibility for her around back and forth, until suddenly Rikako shows up, and everyone piles on her to please for the love of God translate the order and stop holding up the rest of the cafe, which thankfully she does because she actually speaks fluent English. I legitimately cannot explain how funny this scene is and how many times I had to pause when playing until I could stop laughing. It's literal perfect slice of life comedy writing that feels like it came straight out of Azumanga Daioh or Nichijou. It starts with a simple premise and then builds layers and layers of absurdity and escalating tension on top of it, which play perfectly on the personality of each character, putting their dynamics to great use before finally resolving all of it in a way that teaches you something new about Rikako. It's goofy, it's smart, it's great character development, it's hilarious, and I wish I could translate it well and play it in full here, because summarizing it doesn't do 100th of the amount of justice it deserves. But I think it's maybe better saved for players to experience on their own. Maruto deserves some serious props for his ability to balance absolutely dumb shenanigans like that with real and heartfelt emotions, sometimes shifting between the two in a short time with a cleanliness so subtle that it's remarkable. It's never too sad so as to become unbearable, but it's never so constantly comedic that it wears thin, and the writing is often more casual than anything else. Characters being lightly comedic and snarky, people dropping little melancholy hints about themselves that come back later, and everyone together having joyous moments, all tying back to one wonderful, larger, optimistic whole. I deign to use this term lightly because of how it's been co-opted and often used to denigrate works that are impactful because of their darkness, but Parfait is one of the very few pieces of media I feel comfortable calling wholesome. Honestly, the only issue I really have with the writing, which is unfortunately kind of a big one for a romance game, is that you can really tell who was and wasn't given a lot of attention in development. If I had to rank the roots top to bottom, it's probably something like Rikako, Rhea, Yui, Emma, a notable gulf between her and Asuka, and the goddamned Grand Canyon between her and Kasiri. Rikako and Rhea's roots are absolutely incredible, as I'll get into when it comes to time for spoilers, and I think Emma and Yui's roots serve as great companions for those two respectively, the latter more so than the former. There's also Asuka's route, which is okay, as I have said, but then there's Kasuri's route, which embodies everything I despise about 2000 Bishoujo game purity politics. I can't explain why without spoilers, but suffice to say, it frustrated the hell out of me when reading. 4 out of 6 is still good, especially when 2 of those are some of the best writing you'll ever see out of a game like this, and another 2 are great in their own right, but an okay romance and a downright frustrating one are enough to keep this game from being a perfect 10 in my mind. It's a very clear example of the annoying 2000 character game trend of all girls must have a root, something that only got amplified with Second Style on the PS2. That version, along with the subsequent PC backport of the PS Vita release, are just outright worse designed games due to including more content. It adds in a whole new dateable character named Mio, who gives me big Poochie the Dog vibes of how she's awkwardly pasted into the game, as well as it allowing you to romance Mizuna? Look, I love Mizuna as much as the next patrician. I'm weak to smug, cute, flat women with pink hair. It's one of the few things that makes the lesbian part of this fairly straight white girl flick flare up. But did she really need a root? She was perfectly fine being non-romanceable. It just feels very contrary to this game's wish for readers to look at its characters as people. Not every woman needs to be a romantic interest. Neither of these roots or any new events are written by Maruto either, and you can tell. Alchemist Co.'s in-house writer Kono Kiichi does his best to mimic Maruto's style, but something about it just feels off. And yes, that's the same Alchemist Co. who ported the When They Cry games to console and added a billion extra arcs to Higurashi. It's kind of their thing. This is without even getting into the fact that Parfait is such a perfectly paced game that adding in more content disrupts that. There's a whole shopping list of things the main versions of this game do right, but at the very top of that is how briskly paced everything is. Even the most middling parts are hard to put down. Much of this is owed to the structure of the title, which is something I couldn't aptly describe until friend of the channel in interactive fiction Sicko Castell mentioned the ideas of storylet structure in IF titles to me. To steal their paraphrasing of writer Amelie Short's rough definition of the term, a storylet is a piece/snippet of content that triggers based on prerequisites, and they affect the world state in some form or another. And that's basically how Parfait works. While there are some mandatory scenes you'll see as part of playing the game, it's mostly segmented into a series of days which present you with an option of who you want to talk to at that time, with each selection having its own self-contained 5 to 20 minute skit in it, and that affects the progression of the plot and contributes to the overarching narrative. The only time it gets any longer is during a few of those mandatory scenes, as well as the final event for each character. The game calls these ends, some places call them roots. Either way, it's a long series of small scenes stuck together with no choices. And to keep track of all this, you get a handy little flowchart which fills up as you find events, telling the player when they're available and what conditions they'll trigger. The execution of it is basically the platonic ideal of this structure in a visual novel, and it very much feels like that of an S-grade sitcom, or I suppose nowadays one might be more wont to compare it to gacha titles which have adapted this structure, such as Blue Archive. It's a cool look back to the time when interactivity beyond choosing routes was a big part of the genre outside of pure adventure games, and the way it works to flesh out multiple narratives simultaneously, character arcs, the story of Famiu, etc., is really well executed. While I did use a walkthrough when recording this video, I think the system strikes a perfect balance between fun experimentation and guiding the player to make it enjoyable to play without one. My first unfinished playthrough, going up through Yui's normal ending, was done guideless, and I had a pretty good time just picking out whatever scene I thought was interesting and might have gotten Hitoshi closer to her. The only issue I have with this structure is that I am personally not a big fan of how the bad, normal, true ends work here. There's pretty much no reason to ever get a bad or normal end outside of one specific example, because a true end has almost all of the content of the preceding ones. The bads and normals just cut off early with a different closing scene and maybe a unique CG to inspire you to try again. I don't think it's poor design, it's just a bit odd to me and makes anything but the true ends redundant for all but completionists. That's the only reason I'd say this is ultimately a guide game, but if that doesn't bother you, then hey, you're more than welcome to play this like it's 2005 and jump right in with no assistance but the in-game schedule. The art certainly does many favors for making it feel like you're in that decade again. Neko Nyan is one of those illustrators who, alongside Nishimata Aoi of Naval fame, I feel really embodies the best traits of mid-2000s anime artwork of a ton of flair, style, and detail following suit, and this game aptly demonstrates its capabilities, especially in the clothing designs. Obviously, given this is a maid cafe game, the uniforms are what stand out the most and are absolutely wonderful. Kirio and Famiu's designs are distinctly different, yet both super charming, with all their little frills and details and ribbons, and I love the way that each character's uniform is different in small but clever ways. I think it's the personal wear that shines the most to me, though. I've mentioned more than enough times on this channel how much I love outfits that look nice and casual yet still stylish, and this game is full of them. Everyone has their own distinct look that reflects their personality, from Kasuri's blending of old and new stylings to Rikako's business casual-like apparel, and Emma's simple long sweater and tights. It's all varied and lovely without ever feeling outlandish. One thing that I feel is super understated about the art and not nearly enough people bring to attention is also just how everyone actually looks their age. Emma looks like a woman in her early to mid-20s, Yui and Rhea both look like they're 19, Itabashi looks like an actual middle-aged man, Hitoshi's parents look like actual parents, and it all helps the game feel like it's set in the real world. You don't often see age like this in anime art super often, and you most certainly do not see it in the Moe Blobby remake. Something else the remake misses out on is just how emotive the faces and posing is here. Everyone presents their feelings in ways subtly and not so subtly different, but all equally expressive and made even better by how great the presentation and staging is as a whole.
テーブルさん、今日も一日頑張りました。
This is a very, very animated game. The text box isn't just a thing that exists to blast the script onto the screen, but a method of expression in of itself. It stops and starts to match with the voice acting and provide emphasis and font scale up and down to convey volume. Character portraits aren't just static images, but highly animated things that dance around the screen, shift expressions mid-sentence, and have motion to them beyond simply fading in and out. And, of course, the usage of the CGs here is absolutely incredible. There's a whole variety and each feels like it was crafted with love, beautifully rendering the appropriate motions for the scenes they're used in, and thus elevating those moments above what they would be otherwise. I've seen some people online criticize them as being a bit unrefined and dated in places, but is that really a bad thing? I personally love it. It feels, as the kids would say, full of soul, as much as the UI at least. Parfait runs on Giga's good old Nexus engine, and if you're on the same level of attuned to small interface design decisions as I am, you've probably already noticed the game looks similar to other engine titles like Magikoi and Baldur's Sky. Personally, I love how games on this engine look, though it did kind of throw me for a loop at first because I kept thinking of the UI as Baldur's Sky European Cafe Edition when I first started reading. Does that exist? Because I hope that's on a fan disc somewhere. Like usual for Nexus engine games, there's a remarkable amount of UI customizations to suit your needs and sensitivities. Full volume control, character-specific RGB text color selection, animation feature toggles, message speed, font choice, controller support, literally anything you can think of short of a built-in screen reader is here, which I find really admirable from a customization and accessibility standpoint. On top of that, the whole thing is just wildly stylish. It's fluid and animated, decorated with ornate furnishings, has a cute mix of detailed sprite work and pre-rendered art. It's just a level of effort that you don't often see, and I think really shows how much the talented programming and artistry staff cared about giving players the nicest experience possible, just like the VAs. Parfait's VA is absolutely top-notch, which made it all the more surprising for me to learn that most of the cast here is probably best known for this game. Most of the main cast members only appeared in a handful of other small titles, and many haven't even worked in the industry in over a decade. It's sad because I think they're a huge part of why these characters come off as strongly as they do, and a big part of why each character's very well-defined voice and text comes to life. Rika Koseiyu Tomokawa Mari deserves some special praise for delivering all of her most emotionally challenging scenes as perfectly as could be done, though I also really loved Nakami Haruka's performance with Rhea. There's a tone to her voice that sounds ever so slightly imperfect and nasally in a way you don't often hear in anime or visual novels. This is also another area where second style gets kinda weird, as the new content and changes to the old content requires new voice acting from better known VAs that were also great for marketing, except the full game wasn't redubbed, and if you're well acquainted with the original cast like I am, then you can easily hear the subtle differences in the performances. Heck, they even sound like they were recorded in different spaces.
ああ、ごめん。あれなんともならない。了解。じゃあ私は厨房へ。
That port also completely redoes the music, as expected from our good old friends at Alchemist Co., who, as previously mentioned, brought Higurashi and Umineko to consoles with major graphical and aural overhauls. And while Parfait may have not received many graphical changes besides a ton of censorship, it sure as heck did in the music. The second style soundtrack it's fine. It's certainly a better executed score than what the original release offered, though I think it loses a lot of the personality and sort of just feels like typical VN music. In contrast, the score that Parfait launched with has a lot of personality, as is typical for veteran composer Hiroshima Rike, but it also aptly demonstrates his long-standing difficulties with sound programming. I'm normally a fan of games that sound like they are clearly made of late 90s and early 2000s synthesizer presets, but the very pretty and detailed orchestral compositions being rendered with some questionably programmed and already outdated sound libraries results in a flat and static sound that contrasts with an otherwise very lively game. There are a couple standouts still here though, mostly ones not done by Rike. A few songs were actually contributed by Sakura no Sakimie in her very first VN work, a few years before she became part of Alisoft's sound team under the pseudonym DJ C++. They are by far my favorites, and not just because I'm a huge fangirl of her, even if their tendency towards electronic elements feels as out of place as Rike's more electronic tracks do in the European-influenced cafe setting. So it's a good thing then that the music unit Avenue stepped in for Reorder to completely reorchestrate the soundtrack, and it is gorgeous. Parfait's arranged soundtrack takes the music from something pretty middling in execution to beautiful while still feeling appropriate for the time. It brings out all the charm, the melancholy, the joy, the sadness, the whimsy, and the contemplation that was present in the original pieces with a fresh, new, purely acoustic coat of paint. Especially improved are the piano-only pieces, which previously had some rough sound choices and dull dynamics. Now, not only are they full of life and feel like live performances, but many, such as the acoustic version of Leaf Ticket, were rearranged from scratch, taking them from decent piano versions to emotional tearjerkers. Actually, on the note of Leaf Ticket, can I just say this is like one of my favorite openings to a VN ever? Sung by the prolific singer-songwriter Kotoko during her days at the equally prolific music group IVE Sound, it's a sweetly piece of 2000s J-pop with some beautiful, romantic lyrics looking towards a bright future filled with love. Which, I mean, yeah, that's kind of Parfait in a nutshell, and Kotoko's voice really sells the whole thing. I'm very glad that every release of this game, without exception, managed to keep this as the OP because it's such a crucial part of Parfait's identity to me that I can't imagine the game without it. It's just a shame I can't say the same for Avenue's fantastic take on the in-game music, which Alchemist decided, or maybe had, to scrap from the console release. Remake, for whatever reason, also does not have Avenue's score, nor Alchemist's, only the original music, which now feels even more out of place with the higher res graphics. If it's not already clear by everything I've said so far, I really can't recommend Remake as anything but a way to experience the game in English once that comes out, given how much it sacrifices. At least the PC release includes the adult content, I guess. Being that this is a straight romance game, the contents of the adult scenes here are about what you'd expect. Lots of passionate lovemaking, some things vaguely a bit peculiar, but generally keeping in the realm of purely vanilla, which is perfectly fine for me. I love stuff that can be super hardcore, and I love games of wild, boundary-pushing queer content, but I also find stuff like this super appealing. What makes these scenes special, however, is that Maruto treats them with the same level of respect as he does everything else here. This content isn't here merely to sell units or out of obligation, it's its own form of communication between characters, complete with ups and downs, awkward moments, and heartfelt love yous. They're often written beautifully too, with prose and dialogue that really gets across that Hitoshi wants his lover to feel as good as he does, which, like, I'm often not super into scenes that focus heavily on the male POV, but he's just such a charming and loving guy that I found having a window into his thoughts to be enjoyable. The only thing I found disappointing is how little the art prominently features him. Most do their best to leave him out of the picture, quite literally, which I do get from a self-insert standpoint, but the art I enjoyed the most here, both from an erotica and storytelling perspective, were those in which he was as present as the root character was. Still though, the writing is what matters the most to me, and it's stellar, and Maruto's want to use these as a method of expression and character development means that the removal of them in some releases has a far greater impact than just a change to the rating sticker. It's another reason why I think it's really not worth playing Second Style or any of the similar releases. Maybe the replacements are better than I figure they are, but it's genuinely impossible for me to imagine some roots like Rikuko's without the original scenes. And on that note, it's about time I finally dive deep into her story as well as all the others without any filter for spoilers. If you haven't played this game yet and want to go in as blind as possible, then I'd suggest jumping ahead in the video to the end segment to avoid them. But first, let's take a moment to thank all the patrons who make this possible, and shout out some cool people from this community who deserve your attention too. Hello all, and welcome again to that quirky little mid-roll section where I give life updates, channel updates, thank patrons and their donators, and shout out cool people. For this time around, I actually have a fairly big announcement to make related to the channel, and that's that I have finally added Stripe payment support to my Ko-fi account. I've had a few people tell me, or heard down the line from, that they want to donate but can't because of issues with Patreon, which led me to try and find whatever alternatives I could, and this looks to be pretty good as it supports a whole wide variety of payment methods. I'm still trying to figure out how to manage giving rewards with it efficiently though. For now, I'm just DMing people on the website. But if you've been skeptical about Patreon due to its recent messes or any other problem, then hopefully that opens up a new, easy way for donation, or like a bajillion of them. Still though, however you choose to give if you're able to do so, I really appreciate it. Last month hit over 1,400 for the very first time, which is just surreal and awesome, and it gave me a lot of peace of mind as I managed the process of moving one apartment to another, which for the record has been much better for my mental health and work balance. Thank you all, seriously. And in my ongoing attempt to give back to the community that makes this possible, I'd like to shout out some lesser known creators who really deserve attention. Though unlike the previous videos, I won't be pulling from my ongoing Twitter thread of creators who follow me. Not because I ran out or anything, or not because there aren't still cool people, because that thread is incredible and there's still tons and I really recommend going to it to find people to check out, but it's just because there's been two I stumbled onto this month on my own or been suggested to by friends that I really want to highlight. The first channel is Croaze, who I found out about on Tumblr posting about an upcoming video on Slow Damage, a game that many viewers of mine have been asking me to look at, and I can now refer all of you to his video for now, because holy crap is it fantastic. I haven't watched all of it due to not wanting to get spoiled, but despite this being his first video essay, his editing is solid, his voiceover is nice to listen to, and his scripting is all around great. I don't have a ton more to say other than please please watch this video. He's got less than 25 subs at the time I write this, and the video has less than 300 views, which is just a total crime. There are way too few queer people talking about VNs on YouTube, let alone trans masks, so I will always be happy to shout out whoever I can in that regard, especially when they make content as good as this. The second channel I want to shout out is Ricky Hirsch, who you might have seen around since their recent video on queer horror really blew up. I haven't seen that one, I'm sure it's real good judging by the quality of their other works, but the one that really stood out to me is her video on Bocchi the Rock. It's a great look at a great show that focuses on an element of it that I really love, and is similar to what I talk about in this video, that the world is a far kinder place than it seems. She manages to get her points across excellently with entertaining editing, a script that feels fun and personal, still informative, some great voiceovering, and even a cute VTuber persona. Also, any woman that talks about Dino Rex is a real hero and a friend of mine. Her stuff's great and well worth checking out, and there's an extensive backlog too. With those two hopefully open in new tabs or in your watch later list, I want to take a moment to answer the two patron Q&As that came in this month, starting with Nordy asks, do you still plan to cover Sex 2 as mentioned in your Possessioner video? Yes, but the scope of that video kinda exploded. That game has a lot of history to it, it's unhinged. They also asked, how should I play the Marathon games? So for anyone watching this and wondering where the heck this comment about the Marathon games came up with, they're some of my favorite FPS games ever. They have absolutely incredible stories, and they've been freeware for the longest time. I mentioned them in another video in terms of Noel core games that people should play. For anyone wanting to play them, use the freeware Alpha 1 versions. They are way improved from the original releases. Okay, there is one thing I want to mention real quick before wrapping all this up, since I haven't done VN news in a while, and a big one came up. Shirafune is finally releasing their games on Just and Manga Gamer, which means they are way more accessible now. There's some heavy hitters in the first two waves, like Dona Dona is an awesome addition to both those storefronts, and there's more to come, so definitely check it out when you got a chance. At any rate, as always, I again want to thank everyone who makes this content possible. The continued support of y'all and the continually increasing support really blows my mind and makes me happy. It's awesome to be able to do this kind of stuff for a living and see such great support for it, whether that's from longtime genre fans or people who are just now getting into it. And I know I say this kind of stuff every video, I know I say that I say this kind of stuff every video, but I don't know how else to express I'm really, really grateful for this. If you'd like to help support the show as well and get your name on the screen, videos with no censors, monthly updates, access to the list of games to cover, participate in Q&As, and suggest games, then consider making a monthly pledge on Patreon or on Ko-fi, where you can do it one time. Ko-fi also has some lower fees, but either is totally fine for me. Just use whatever is most convenient for you at whatever amount you want to give. It all gives the same benefits. There's no shame in not donating either. Any sort of help, be that kind comments, like sharing these videos around, financial, whatever, all contributes to making this possible. I would not be where I am without every single bit of support involved. Again, I'm just impossibly happy that I can make videos that mean so much to so many people and provide nice entertainment to many others. If I'm making people happy, then I gotta be doing something right? Alright, that's all for now. Thank you so much as always, and let's get back to the show. As mentioned before, Parfait is split into 6 separate heroine routes, each one focusing on the protagonist's mutual romantic love with one of the romanceable women. It's typical fare for a Bishoujo game, but what makes it so special and enter that upper echelon is how well written each of them are individually, for the most part, and how well they tie into a single greater whole. Yui and Reia's route specifically go into the challenges of being siblings, the former being adopted into Reia's family 5 years prior at the age of 14. Born into a musically inclined family of a famous pianist father, Reia had been herself studying to play, at least until Yui came to the picture, when it turns out that she completely eclipsed Reia, she being someone who also found joy from the instrument despite her messy first household. Yui has the opportunity to go to a prestigious school, appears like a well put together beauty, and more or less comes off as the perfect star child, while Reia is the one who kinda just floats around. It's no surprise then that the two don't have the best of relationships, with Yui wishing they could be close again and Reia feeling as if she's without a place to belong. It's not as if the parental family situation helps much either, given Reia seems to give them very little thought, and Yui describes herself as a parasite at one point. Of course, there's even more complication to all this than there seems, which get explored in their separate endings as well as their shared events leading up to them. Hitoshi slowly assembles that whole winding mess of family relations and does his absolute best to try and set the stage for the two to reconnect, and following that, begin the process of mending their lives. It leads to some really beautiful scenes of the two sisters finding they can still care for each other. I especially adore what acts as the main crux of Yui's route, a piano piece which broke Reia during during a performance, causing her to quit playing, and Yui can no longer perform because of the pain associated with that. After Hitoshi pushes Yui to continue her studies after months of neglect and almost getting sent back to France because of it, she works herself ragged trying to catch up, soon falling apart trying to learn Chopin's Aeolian harp. What follows is Hitoshi trying to nurse her back to health and consulting of Rhea to try and figure out just what's happening and get a full picture of the story. Why that piece is so impossible for such a seemingly genius pianist. Rhea explains the trauma associated with it to Hitoshi, recontextualizing dreams that the player sees which first seem like Yui, not Rhea, running off stage following a failed performance. It's from opening up about this that Rhea realizes she has a part to play in it all. As Yui is staying with Hitoshi overnight for countless days, trying to keep her away from practicing to death so she can recover and take care of herself, they get a call from Rhea who demands they both come back to Yui's apartment immediately. And once they do, Yui finds something she thought she'd never see again. Rhea performing in front of her, playing the piece that once broke her, now flawlessly, as Yui can do nothing but stand there and gently cry while Hitoshi monologues to himself. That is good for those who can push on to do so, and those who cannot to rest a little. All Yui needed was a break and some help, and so Rhea gave it to her. She studied and worked hard for her sake because she couldn't at that time. Rhea turned that traumatic piece into one of beauty for them both, mending the pain they felt, and through it, finding family they lost. It's a touching moment accompanied by a wonderfully poetic quote that really highlights the rhythmic feel of the text I mentioned earlier. The way the concept is rendered is all at the same time simple, playful, charming, personable, yet subtly complex, highlighting the grand emotional core behind Rhea's kindness. It perfectly shows Maruto's greatest strength as a writer in this title, a strength which her root capitalizes on. It's less about her and Yui, though there is a decent amount of that, mostly in events shared between the two true ends, and more about how she, without intending to, closes herself off from other people in the world without realizing it. Because of her feeling of unbelonging, believing herself not to have a place in Curio as anything greater than an employee, or in her family, or in FAMU, she accepts an offer that almost ruins the relationship she develops with Hitoshi. The main Curio branch calls and asks for her to transfer, which she sees as a fine move. In her mind, it's the only way to secure a future for herself and advance her career, so it's the mature, logical decision. And yeah, that's not untrue. Hitoshi sees it the same way, but there's an emotional side to it too that both of them struggle to reconcile. That job is 2 hours away by train. It's just not practical for them to meet more than once a month, which may not be enough to keep the love from fading away. What follows is a slow-burning, earnest, and painful look at how a relationship going long distance can be unmanageable for some people. And even speaking as someone who is okay with them as long as the gap can one day be closed, I would be lying if I didn't say this route didn't hit me personally, both with sympathizing with Rhea's attempts to cope by finding every possible rationalization, and Hitoshi's feeling of pain as he struggles to manage. Rather than Hitoshi accepting that things have to turn out this way, however, he instead crafts a plan with the help of all of his friends, to bring back the original FAMU in its original place, with him and Rhea running it as lovers. Initially, everyone is against this plan because it seems absurd and irresponsible even as FAMU number 2 is flourishing, but in his usual stubborn ways, Hitoshi pushes through with it and sets the entire thing up without telling Rhea until it's all ready to go into action. Expectedly and kinda deservedly that upsets her, but it all works out. The last step for them is to take a stop at the home curio store where Hitoshi asks, in a completely blundered way, for them to allow Rhea to work with him, something she had never even thought would be possible or had even considered. And much to their surprise, they accepted it happily, showing Rhea that there's a bit more to the world than just what she considered. It's a bit bigger and a bit kinder than once thought, and through his conviction, Hitoshi is able to give Rhea what she'd been missing this whole time, a place to belong, built with someone she loves. I personally love the conclusion that these two threads get in the end, her feelings of not belonging and her only seeing one way forward, because it's just so beautifully optimistic about the future. It's not always the case, and there always will be times of unchangeable hardships, but there's just as many times where with a bit of bravery, a bit of planning, and maybe a bit of blind optimism, we can find a hereto unforeseen path forward that makes us all happy and mends our wounds. That last part is the focus of Rikuko's route, exploring why her and Hitoshi broke up, the troubles of them getting back together, and the secrets she'd been hiding from everyone since the original FAMU burned down half a year before the game started. Both of them still have at least some level of crush on each other, but Hitoshi never tries to cross the boundary into being lovers until the very start of the route, and Rikuko actively keeps a distance at just friends, never even opening herself up enough to consult anyone about her problems. For pretty much the whole game, she adopts a sort of it is what it is attitude towards everything. Romance, It's business troubles, job searching, friendships, seeming to be impenetrable and shrugging everything off of her analytical, borderline pessimistic at points outlook. And for a lot of the game, that outlook is able to do good things for people. She guides Hitoshi when he's lost of love towards other heroines, and she's the singular reason that the new Famiyu survives thanks to smart business advice. Rikako is undoubtedly a well-adjusted and mature person in many ways, but behind that exterior is someone hurting greatly. There's hints about this everywhere, most apparent whenever the topic of Hitoshi's number one priority comes up, family, especially when she talks to Hitoshi's older sister Emma. But it's present in other ways too, like how she does her absolute best to avoid being seen doing anything. She acts awkward studying and writing around Hitoshi, seems dodgy with some normal questions and conversation, and when she comes to taste test to help Famiyu as it's floundering, she firmly demands she not be watched. Which, on a first playthrough, all of this just seems like her keeping a distance or being shy. That very last one in particular was played off initially as kind of a cutesy moe thing, not wanting to be seen eating food or wearing glasses, the latter of which being a fact established earlier on in the game. However, there's more going on, which comes to fruition in her true ending when Hitoshi gets back with her. For a time, it seems to be working out. They spend a lot of days and nights together, even crossing a boundary they never did before by having sex, but there's always something that seems to be eating at Rikako. While it's clear that Hitoshi cares about her, he still prioritizes family and especially his older sister over everything else in his life, even ignoring something big about Rikako that should have been obvious. Like always though, she tries to not let it get to her, nor anything else that troubles her. She always appears as put together and constantly refuses help unless absolutely cornered into receiving so. The first time the player sees it happen is halfway through her ending when Hitoshi notices her hand is bandaged and not being used due to what she claims is a recent burn and, through persistence, gets her to accept help with eating and cooking. This all comes to a head a few days later as she's staying over again and goes to take a bath when Hitoshi tells her she should take her bandage off first. She pushes back against the idea much to his confusion, them going back and forth until Hitoshi finally wins, and notices that there's no trace of there ever being a burn on her hand. She keeps trying to dodge talking about it and making things up, growing increasingly more scared until he realizes she's not moving her supposedly burned but perfectly fine left hand, her dominant hand. She hasn't moved the entire time they've been back together. In fact, she hasn't moved it for months. Everything from her being nervous about writing and studying around Hitoshi, wearing glasses instead of contacts like she always used to, not wanting to be seen taste testing, even wanting her hands tied during intercourse, stems entirely from the fact that at some point she lost control of her hand. And Hitoshi, like a complete fool, despite all the obvious signs, despite how attentive to even the finest detail he'd been with his sister's health, never noticed this about his former girlfriend until now. The moment he realizes this and asks about it, she starts crying and begging him to stop before eventually running away on the late winter night. And when he does eventually catch up, it doesn't take long before he finally gets confirmation on what just happened. When the original Famiyu burned down half a year ago, she was there and suffered a severe injury that destroyed nerves in her left arm and partially paralyzed her. While she did go to the hospital soon after the incident, Hitoshi left in order to stay by his older sister's side during her hardships before they even knew anything, and before she was informed that there was effectively no chance of recovery. So she did her best to hide her disability from him and everyone else at every opportunity, avoiding help or attention as much as she could. Like many other times he failed to pay attention to her in favor of others of his family whom he never invited her to be a part of, he failed her. And just like all those other times, she never spoke up too greatly about how she felt. She feared that if one thing came out, all of her emotions would spill out and hurt the one she loved. And so it broke not just her, but their relationship all those months ago, and once again now. Just to add salt to all of this, and to force the player to understand how dire his mistakes and neglect of her were, the game forcefully ends her and Hitoshi's tale here on the first playthrough of a bad ending. Rikako leaves him for good, unable to bear all the pain he's caused as he's forced to reflect on it all. The times he never paid her attention, the times he left her in dark moments to take care of others, and all the other times he hurt her. This is about the moment where I think this game broke me. I very rarely cry at media, but every single thing about Rikako's breakdown and confession destroyed me because of how real it felt and how much of myself I saw in it. Her struggles to express her feelings, her desire for others to notice changes in her, her need to be loved, and the way she pushed all of it down to adopt an exterior where no matter what happened, no matter what pain she felt, she simply says it can't be helped while breaking apart inside, unable to decide if she wants someone to notice or wants to remain unseen. scene. And above all, the fear that if even one of those things slips, every single part of her will spill out with all the bile and sadness that follows suit. It's an experience that I think a lot of people can relate to, especially those forced to learn how to stay calm and mature at way too young an age, and I was hit especially hard by as someone with severe PTSD. Something I don't think I've ever quite gone into detail about on this channel, despite how much I've talked about this, is the level of performance that goes into not making it apparent to other people. It's something I'm better with now, but for a very long time, and even still to an extent, I've been very much guilty of doing the exact things Rikako did to hide her disability. I did my best to hide any part of me that may have been hurt from people. I deliberately tried to express my feelings and well-being in a way that wouldn't drum up much attention, and I also did my best to act like it didn't exist, no matter how much my head was pounding at any given moment from any given small thing. Showing this was showing a sign of damage, and there was no way in hell I was going to burden anyone in my life by making them worry about me. There's a feeling of internal shame, almost, that comes from knowing that people know you're injured in some way, that by exposing the part of myself which is hurt, especially if it's the people who have contributed to that hurt, that I am somehow going to wound them, and that them not feeling pain by knowing they've hurt me is more important than anything else. Even if it means that I have to hurt more, at least concealing it means I'm not hurting others. I saw a part of myself I didn't want to see in this. I saw the part of myself I perform around others in order to avoid hurt. I saw the part of myself I perform around people as I convince myself my feelings don't matter, and I saw the part of myself that can't decide if it wants people to care for me or believe I'm best when no one has to care about that. I cried for a long time after reading this scene. A lot of times, actually. I sobbed while reading it. I sobbed in the first private place I could find while on a walk to clear my mind after reading. I sobbed again while writing all of this, and I'm actively fighting back crying again so I can actually voice this. I look at a lot of media that means a lot to me, but I can't think of another story that tore me apart quite this wide open since I read Canon back in February of last year during one of my most vulnerable times. This scene hurt, and I'm happy it did because it reminded me how important it is that I don't hide my pain, and it reminded me how much work I still have to do in accepting that. What I think is most incredible about this is Maruto's ability to write something this painfully real and earnest, something that fully acknowledges and gives spotlight to the pain that Hitoshi caused Rikako through his own inaction and short-sightedness, while still not completely painting Hitoshi as a bastard. At the end of it all, they're both people. Him, someone who foolishly fails to pay attention to the people most important to him, the people right in front of him, and her, someone who's been hurt to the point she's scared to express herself and keeps hurting in a misguided effort to protect herself. I think it's because of this empathetic view towards human emotion and mistakes that the resolution works out as well as it does. With Rikako at her wit's end, depressed knowing what she feels is her worst secret is out, feeling hopeless about recovery or any future in life again, and knowing that she'll never be as important to Hitoshi as his family, she quits school and effectively gives up in despair. Hitoshi, however, in his usual stubborn ways, decides he has to do what he can to make things right. He puts together a complicated plan, talking to her family, the school, and her doctor, doing every single thing he can to keep her on track and find any semblance of hope for recovery before she eventually confronts him on just what the hell he's been doing. While she's already resigned in her mind, seeing her disability as a reminder of all of her pain and something she can never come back from, the chance of healing as so slim that there's no hope for her, Hitoshi believes in that slim chance and he wants to do everything he can to help her rehabilitate. And furthermore, he wants to show her that she can live with this, that it's okay for her to be helped like she's refused to let anyone do so before. Furthermore, he makes a wild promise on a whim. Family is never going to stop being the most important thing to him, that much is true, so as soon as he graduates, they'll get married. It's cheesy and silly and an absurd promise to make, and both of them know as much, but it shows that Hitoshi really does care for her, and he knows how to make things right by her this time, even with his stubborn, stupid ways. And so, Rikako finally lets her guard down and regains hope. She has a goal to work towards again, they have faith in each other, and she finally accepts help so she can accomplish her dreams, starting with a very simple one, getting to don the FAMU uniform once again. It's something she can never do with one hand because of all of its complex parts, but Hitoshi helps her and welcomes her back to the FAMU family with open arms, and soon after into his family of marriage, her arm healed years later, holding a child she never thought she would be able to hold. It's a beautifully hopeful ending that, just like Rhea's, shows how much wider and kinder the world can be than one might expect. Rikako resigns from everything and Hitoshi shows her that she's more than capable of recovering and living a happy life with some help until then. And as for him, he realizes his mistakes and genuinely grows as a person in a way that not many other characters can claim to have done. It's a warm ending full of hope that even those who are wounded greatly can recover, that those who have wounded greatly can make amends. And as someone who believes strongly in the goodness of other people, that kind of warmth and compassion strikes a strong chord with me. But what I think hits even stronger here is that faith in the slimmest of odds to work out, that hope for it alone is enough to ride on. The game isn't blind to how painful this is. Part of the last big tense conversation Hitoshi and Rikako have is her wondering just how long she has to persevere in the kind of pain she's suffering to achieve recovery. Hitoshi, reasonably, like any person would, can't give a concrete answer to this, only that she has to try until she can grasp his hand again with hers. But they can still become family. And that bond, the closest bond that Hitoshi can offer to another person, a bond which he foolishly never offered to her before, is reason enough for her to persist until that day with the one she loves the most. Parfait does not deny how painful it is to push on until things are okay. It doesn't pretend to have some grandiose answer, and it doesn't have any deep philosophy to offer its readers on how to cope with the suffering of life and tragedy, because I mean, is there really any? What it instead offers is a very human reminder that there is solace from these things in other people. There is hope and reason enough to push on until we can heal, and there is hope and reason enough to always believe that our wounds can heal with the ones most important to us. For Hitoshi, that's his family and it will always be that way, but maybe for others, simply friends are enough to keep going. Maybe a beloved partner, maybe simply knowing that other people generally want to be good is reason enough to push through times of sorrow and pain. The point is, whatever you're going through, whatever you're suffering through, there are people that care about you. There are people that love you, and those people can be enough to keep you going in your darkest times. They can be enough for you to hold on to a dream of happiness, no matter how slim it is, no matter what that dream may be. On a more cultural critic-y and story review-y note, I also want to note how peculiar this route was for its time. Most true roots for visual novels then were with the perfect dreamlike characters, the kind of flawless beauties who maybe need a little help in places but embody everything that society finds desirable about a woman. Rikako, in contrast, is a brilliant, self-sufficient, and wholly imperfect person. She's disabled and hides it, she's emotionally traumatized, and she handles it all in an extremely human way. I think there's something poetic and beautiful that the closest this game has to a true love and a true root is with the most human and fragile person in the cast. On top of that, it's a root about an ex-girlfriend. That might sound like nothing if you're unfamiliar with mid-2000s romantic visual novel drama, but that's a huge deal given this was a time that bizarre versional purity culture was at its height. Just for perspective, Parfait came out just over half a year after Kakusei 2 by Elf, a game which earned its developers death threats for having a heroine with sexual experience. For a fairly big budget and highly advertised game like this from a well-beloved company to go all in on having a heroine like Rikako and not just take her past relationship and emotions seriously, but more or less make her the most well-developed character, I feel deserves some serious commendations. I can't think of many other games willing to do that, which unfortunately includes parts of Parfait itself. Perhaps by the will of that blasted thing known as the Law of Balance, this title also has one of the most painfully dated handlings of past relationships in Kasudi's route. It is in part about her not feeling she has any home in Famiu. She's a jack of all trades, master of none, juggling between doing treats less well than the incredible Emma and being purely average floor staff unlike Asuka or the singing waitress Yui, often confiding in Hitoshi to be told that she has a place just how she is. I think this part of her route is really interesting and well done, and the way it concludes with her switching sides to Curio, getting involved in a big televised baking contest with music from Giga's fighting game series playing in the background, and realizing her home was at Famiu all along is honestly a blast and really heartfelt. And if things ended there, it'd be fine, but they don't. The problem is the romantic end of things, with its major crux being that Hitoshi thinks Kasudi's had a boyfriend in the past and can't wrap his head around it. He interprets every phone call she has with a guy, or what he presumes is with a guy, as having a boyfriend up till dating Hitoshi at the start of her route, and once that route does start, he gets nervous every time during intercourse that she learned techniques from someone else, or he's not special enough for not being her first guy. It's frustrating to say the least, to watch someone flounder this badly over something that in no reasonable world should matter, and to see him utterly literally refuse to communicate any of his feelings or worries about this to her while she does nothing wrong. And instead of asking her, he just lets all the worries and pains pile up and almost completely ruin their relationship until it's revealed at the end that she never had another boyfriend anyways. It honestly borders on being offensive in two very different ways. One, it portrays Hitoshi as a complete fool in ways that go against his character for the sake of nonsense drama. And two, it throws away any chance it had to commentate on the absurdity of wanting quote-unquote pure women for a big comedic reveal that completely fails to land. I honestly think I would have enjoyed the route a lot more had Kasuri really been an experienced semen demon and Hitoshi forced to confront his absurd ideas of what love is, but what we got instead was something that reinforced a gross status quo that demonized women with experience. Kasuri root Hitoshi does not deserve Kasuri, and she deserved far better than this. Even Asuka's route is miles better, and I don't have much to say on that because it's just average Bishoujo game affair. It's fine, it ends nicely, it has some good thematic moments, I think it's cute in places, it's alright. A step above Kasuri, but a big step below every other route, including Emma's. I actually enjoyed that one a lot more than I expected, in part because it's more or less a prequel to Rikako's route and an exploration of Hitoshi's clinginess towards family. The impetus for the romance kicking off is Hitoshi trying to get back of Rikako, throwing out of the blue that he'll be waiting for her at the train station on Christmas Eve. If Hitoshi decides to quit waiting after she doesn't show up on his time, rather than keep waiting, which kicks off her route, he goes back to the most important thing in his life, his family, with Emma warmly welcoming him and listening to his grievances. It doesn't take long for this to turn into romance, the two indulging what they both know is a forbidden love, that of brother and sister, or really cousins by blood, but still. Things progress like this for a while until Rikako enters the picture, a dear friend to both of them who Emma hurts gravely by snapping at in a mutual event leading up to their endings. What follows is both of them slowly realizing just what it is they're doing in this relationship. Hitoshi still feels for Rikako, he wants her to be happy and wants her to be okay with this for his own comfort and validation, even though seeking that hurts her. She does her best not to show it, as she always does, but it's still painful enough for her to break out into tears without intending. And Emma, for as much as she does genuinely care about Hitoshi, eventually realizes she's been using him as a replacement for her lost husband, unsure of what to do with her feelings about him and Hitoshi and her own self-hate, whether he's really someone she loves or just family she seduced for her own misguided emotions. At the end of it all, the two manage to reconcile their individual feelings and resolve to make it right for everyone involved. Emma and Hitoshi talk through everything they feel about their former loves, and Emma sincerely apologizes to Rikako for how she's thoughtlessly hurt her, both in times when Rikako dated Hitoshi and now that it's long past. I was really pleasantly surprised by how this route came out in the end. The way it sets up a lot for Rikako's route and builds on her feelings is very much welcome, and the exploration of how people use others as replacements for past lovers was not something I expected this game to touch on, let alone as well as it did. It's also the route that probably does the most to look into how Hitoshi's obsession with family hurts Rikako, something that's, again, super important to her ending. I just kinda wish it wasn't romantic. In my view, it would have been just as effective if the two realized they were using their closeness with each other to replace feelings they missed from their lovers, but I still think it's a good read just for how it adds on to Rikako's backstory and gives more clarity to both her and Hitoshi's feelings, serving to make the final message of the game more powerful. While each of these 6 routes deals with different things, they all tie back into those powerful central themes that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, about where and how we can find happiness and how it often requires mending past parts of ourselves to achieve. If we want to grow as people, then we have to acknowledge others have hurt us, how we've hurt others, how we've hurt ourselves, and work to reconcile that in whatever ways we need. Sometimes that means making huge changes in our lives and making big leaps of faith towards something better. Sometimes that means a simple yet beautiful gesture. Sometimes that means apologizing to the ones we've hurt, and sometimes it means reaching a hand out to those who need it and letting them know you care, that you will give them the happiness they deserve. No matter what though, we all have things we need to mend with ourselves and with others, and we can do it. Because ultimately, the world is a good place. It's bigger and kinder than I think a lot of us realize. So, at the end of this all, what do I think of Parfait almost 20 years after it first released in 2005? No, that can't be right. It hasn't been almost 20 years since... Oh god. And the answer, if it's not already clear, is that I think it's one of the best visual novels of its era. Despite a few flaws, it's one that's overwhelmingly full of beautiful hope for the future and an earnest appreciation for life that you don't often see in media. I think it's easy to find things that are fluffy, optimistic, and bright-eyed, but it's hard to find media that maintains that level of optimism while directly confronting the challenges that a lot of us face. It's for that reason alone, among many others, that the game is really worth reading. It's only about 30 to 35 hours long to see everything too, though bear in in mind that if you're a Japanese learner, you might struggle a bit with it. Because of how much of the game's beauty comes from its clever use of language, it's hard for me to recommend to anyone who's not been studying for at least a year or two and done a ton of reading. I know for a fact that I would have been lost if I made this one of my first games, so I'm happy I waited until when my skills were decent so I could fully appreciate what it has to offer. Because truly, Parfait does have a lot to offer as a game about many things. Trauma, disability, breakups, struggles with family, our own failures to care for each other, and countless other parts of the human experience that can happen to us at any time. It's a game that wants to talk about all of them with a warmth and love that you rarely see, and it wants to instill a hope in those who read it that things will be okay. That no matter how slim the chance of success, that we may be able to seize it. That no matter how dire things may be, there will always be people with us. And to never forget that we can mend our wounds, forgive ourselves, and forgive each other. We can rebuild ourselves stronger, and we can rebuild each other better. People are good at that, aren't they?
そんなつまんない恋したこと